The shells screamed skyward, endless streams of metal hatred. Joseph's hands bled on the flak controls, eyes burning from sleepless nights of firing. German flak crews fired thousands of shells and watched. American bombers keep coming. Each dawn revealed more factories in ruins, while American production lines hummed untouched across the ocean. Subscribe to witness the moment mathematics crushes faith, when a young man realizes his courage feeds a machine that has already calculated his defeat. Josef Richter squinted through bloodshot eyes at the approaching formation, black specks against the March sky growing larger with each passing second. 22 years old and already a veteran of the Luftwaffe's 88mm flak batteries defending the Ruhrgebiet, he had celebrated his last birthday, calculating trajectory tables instead of drinking with friends. The industrial heart of Germany stretched around him, smokestacks and steelworks now serving as reference points for American bombardiers. His battery had been positioned on a concrete platform overlooking the sprawling Krupp works, the massive factory complex that produced the very weapons they fired skyward in its defense. Target height 8,000 meters, bearing 275, wind speed 30 kilometers, shouted Feldwebel Müller, his voice cracking with the strain of being heard over the cacophony of war. Joseph's hands moved automatically, adjusting the elevation wheel of the targeting computer as his crew loaded another heavy shell into the breach. Sweat trickled down his spine, despite the cold March air. The smell of cordite mixed with the industrial stench of the Ruhr Valley, coal smoke, molten metal, and now the acrid bite of explosives. Around him, 15 other flak emplacements created a protective ring, their crews moving with the mechanical precision that endless drills had burned into muscle memory. The first salvos erupted with synchronized fury, the 88mm guns bucking against their recoil mechanisms as shells raced skyward. Joseph counted silently, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until the black puffs of their explosions blossomed among the bomber formation. Too far to the left. He made a quick adjustment, reloading as automatically as breathing. Above, the American bombers maintained their course, flying with an arrogant steadiness that made his jaw clench. B-17s and B-24s, their aluminum skins catching the morning light, undisturbed by the deadly bouquets blooming beneath their wings. Josef had once believed the propaganda that claimed each German shell found its mark with scientific precision. That had been before the mathematics lesson. Before Feldwebel Müller had gathered the crew one evening and quietly explained the reality that none of their officers would admit. 20,000 shells, he had said, his voice flat, empty of its usual drill ground authority. 20,000 shells to bring down one flying fortress. And do you know how many flying fortresses their factories produce in a month? 1,000. 1,000 bombers while we scrape the bottom of our brass reserves. The words had hung in the air of their bunker, heavier than the shells they loaded hour after hour. Josef had lain awake that night, multiplying and dividing in his head until the numbers blurred into meaninglessness. The sky above the Ruhrgebiet became a mathematical equation written in smoke and fire, each explosion a variable in a formula that always produced the same answer: futility. Josef's gun fired again, the concussion rattling his bones as he fed another shell into the hungry breach. His childhood mathematics teacher had once praised his quick mind. "You understand numbers, Josef," Herr Weber had said. "That will serve you well in life." Now, as he watched another formation of bombers push through the flak barrage unscathed, he understood numbers too well. He understood the production figures, the shell expenditures, the attrition rates. He understood with mathematical certainty that they were losing. The Americans came in perfect formation, as if on parade. Joseph's battery fired again and again, the rhythm hypnotic in its deadly regularity. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. 20,000 shells for one bomber, 1,000 bombers each month from American factories. The equation solved itself with cruel finality as Joseph watched a single B-17 trailing smoke from one engine, descending gradually out of formation, one down. How many thousands of shells from how many batteries across the Ruhr had it taken? And still they came, wave after wave, their bomb bay doors opening like the maws of mechanical beasts, disgorging destruction with industrial efficiency. The sky belonged to mathematics now, and the numbers had no mercy. Dawn broke reluctantly over the Ruhr Valley, revealing a landscape transformed by the previous day's raid. Joseph stood at the edge of their emplacement, counting the new craters that pockmarked the factory grounds like a disease. Sleep had evaded him, chased away by the endless calculations that now plagued his thoughts more than the Allied bombs. Around him, the other members of his crew moved with the slow deliberation of exhaustion, checking equipment and replenishing their ammunition stocks from the dwindling supply bunkers. The morning air carried the scent of burnt rubber and smoldering buildings, the industrial perfume of a war that was consuming everything it touched. "Richter, stop daydreaming and help with the shells," Feldwebel Müller's voice cut through Joseph's thoughts. The older man's face had grown gaunt in recent weeks, deep lines etched around his eyes where there had been only weather-beaten skin before. Joseph nodded and moved to the ammunition cart, lifting the heavy 88mm shells with practiced care. Each one represented precious metals, laboriously mined, refined and manufactured, a small miracle of German industry that would ascend to the heavens and explode in futile defiance. 20,000 of these miracles to claim one American bomber. The mathematics of it made his stomach clench with a dread that food rationing had never achieved. Their battery had been reinforced overnight with teenagers from the Hitler Youth, boys with faces still soft with childhood, but eyes already hardened by years of war. Joseph watched them struggle with the heavy ammunition, their thin shoulders straining under burdens meant for men. "Careful with the fuse settings," he instructed a boy who couldn't have been more than 15. "Set them wrong, and you waste the shell." The boy nodded earnestly, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the delicate timing mechanism. Joseph didn't have the heart to add that even perfectly set fuses rarely found their targets. That 20,000 properly fused shells were needed to bring down a single bomber. That the boy's painstaking care was just another variable in an equation already solved. By midday, the radar operators were calling warnings again. "Large formation approaching from the west. Estimated time to target 20 minutes. The announcement sent crews scrambling to their positions with practiced urgency. Joseph took his place at the rangefinder, squinting through the optical sight as he had done hundreds of times before. The spring sky above was clear and cruelly beautiful, offering no clouds to shelter the city below. In the distance, he could see the tiny black shapes resolving into the now familiar silhouettes of American heavy bombers. B-17s again, their contrails etching white lines across the blue expanse like chalk on a mathematician's board, calculating the destruction to come. The first shells screamed upward as the bombers came within range, the synchronized fire of dozens of batteries creating a steel rain that climbed toward the American formation. Joseph worked his controls mechanically, making minute adjustments to elevation and azimuth as the targeting solutions flowed from the primitive analog computer. Around him, his crew loaded and fired with the rhythm of a factory production line. An ironic mirror to the American factories that had already determined the outcome of this uneven equation. The air filled with the acrid smell of cordite and hot metal as shell after shell leapt from the barrel of their 88mm gun, joining thousands of others in their futile journey. Above them, black puffs of flak blossomed among the bomber formation, surrounding the planes with deadly flowers that somehow never touched their targets. Joseph watched through his rangefinder as the bombers maintained their course, flying with the implacable determination of machines fulfilling their programmed function. Occasionally, a plane would shudder under a direct hit, sometimes trailing smoke or falling out of formation. But for everyone that faltered, dozens pressed on, their bomb bay doors opening with mechanical precision. 20,000 shells, one bomber, 1,000 bombers each month. The equation remained unchanged, its solution as fixed as the stars that Joseph could no longer see through the smoke-filled nights. As the bombs began to fall, Joseph felt the concrete platform tremble beneath his feet like a living thing in pain. The Krupp works erupted in geysers of flame and debris, vital production lines vanishing in instants of calculated violence. He kept firing, loading, adjusting, his actions divorced from their futility by the demands of duty. A shell casing ejected from the breech rolled to a stop against his boot, still hot enough to burn through the leather. Joseph stared at it for a moment. One brass casing, one expended shell among 20,000 needed. The mathematics of defeat had never been more clear than in that single cooling piece of metal lying uselessly at his feet. The officers called it a strategic redeployment. Joseph and his fellow gunners called it retreat. Their battery had been moved further east after the Krupp works became inoperable, relocated to defend one of the few remaining functional factories in the region. The new emplacement offered no improvements. The same concrete pad, the same aging 88mm gun, the same inadequate radar that gave them barely 15 minutes warning before the bombers arrived. Joseph helped position their equipment with mechanical efficiency, his mind detached from his body's movements, as though observing a stranger going through familiar motions. The April sun cast long shadows across their new position, highlighting the gaunt faces of his crew, each man marked by the same knowledge that haunted Joseph's calculations. "They say we're getting new shells," said Werner, the loader whose boyish face had aged years in months. "Proximity fuses, like what they use on the Eastern Front." Joseph nodded but said nothing, unwilling to nurture false hope. New fuses might improve their accuracy marginally, might reduce the mathematical equation from 20,000 shells to perhaps 15,000. But the American factories still produced 1,000 bombers each month. The variables changed slightly, but the final solution to the equation remained unaltered. Around them, other crews established their positions with the same quiet efficiency, men moving through the choreography of war with eyes that had seen too much and expected too little. That night, gathered around a small stove in their bunker, Feldwebel Müller shared the latest production figures that had filtered down from command. "Steel allocation for artillery shells has been reduced by 40%, he said, his voice flat in the dimly lit space. "They need it for tanks on the Eastern Front." No one spoke for several moments, each man performing his own internal calculations. 40% fewer shells, 20,000 shells needed per bomber. 1,000 American bombers each month. Joseph stared into the small flames of the stove, watching them consume the meager coal allotment with the same industrial efficiency that was consuming Germany itself. The warmth never seemed to reach his bones anymore. The next morning brought clear skies and the inevitable wail of sirens. Joseph took his position at the gun, hands moving through the familiar sequence of preparations as radar reports tracked the approaching formation. "B-24s this time," called the spotter. 30 plus at bearing 280, altitude 7,600 meters. Joseph made the necessary adjustments to their firing solution, the numbers flowing through his mind and into his hands with practiced precision. Around him, other batteries opened fire, their reports thundering across the landscape in a desperate symphony. Above, the spring sky began to bloom with black flowers, thousands of explosive petals unfurling around the approaching American formation without ever touching their metal targets. Joseph watched through his optical sight as the bombers maintained their course through the flak barrage. Beside him, Werner loaded shell after shell, his movements growing more frantic as the formation drew closer. "They're not turning," he said, a note of panic in his voice. "Why aren't they turning?" Joseph had no answer that mathematics had not already provided. The Americans flew straight through the deadly garden they had planted in the sky, their course unwavering, as though the thousands of explosions were merely atmospheric disturbances, minor inconveniences on their appointed rounds. One bomber trailed smoke from its right wing, another fell behind the formation with an engine feathered. 2 damaged out of 30, thousands of shells expended. The equation balanced with merciless precision. As the bombs began to fall on the factory they had been assigned to protect, Joseph continued firing with mechanical detachment. Each shell that left their gun barrel was a small piece of Germany's dwindling resources thrown into the sky in defiance of a mathematical certainty. The factory erupted in precisely targeted destruction, American bombs finding their marks with the same industrial efficiency that had produced both the bombs and their delivery systems. Joseph watched a massive wall collapse in slow motion, decades of German engineering erased in seconds by American production. He kept firing until the bombers had passed beyond their effective range, kept adjusting their aim until the last black speck disappeared into the eastern sky. Only then did he step back from his position, his hands shaking with exhaustion and a deeper tremor that came from knowing that tomorrow would bring the same equation, the same solution, the same futility. May brought flowers to the countryside and fresh craters to the cities. Joseph's battery had been relocated twice more, each position further east, each factory they defended more critical to the war effort and thus more certain to attract American attention. Their crew had lost 3 men to a strafing attack by P-51 Mustangs that had broken through the high cover, replaced by Hitler Youth boys with eager faces and trembling hands. Joseph found himself playing the role of veteran, showing these children how to load and aim, how to calculate wind drift and elevation, never mentioning the mathematics that made their efforts as futile as trying to empty the Rhine with a teacup. The oldest of them, a boy named Friedrich, with serious eyes and a dusting of blonde hair, followed Joseph like a shadow, absorbing techniques that would not save him. The ammunition situation had grown worse with each passing week. 500 shells per gun, Feldwebel Müller announced one evening, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions made far above his pay grade. We fire only when they're directly overhead and only at confirmed bomber formations. The men received this news in silence, each performing the same calculation. 500 shells, 20,000 needed per bomber, 1,000 American planes each month. Joseph watched Friedrich's face as the boy worked through the numbers, saw the moment when understanding dawned in his young eyes. Too young to drink, old enough to comprehend the mathematics of defeat. That night, Joseph heard the boy crying quietly in his bunk, muffled sobs that no one acknowledged in the morning. The raid came just after dawn, the sirens giving them barely 10 minutes warning before the first bombers appeared on the horizon. Joseph moved his crew with clipped commands, positioning Friedrich at the ammunition feed where he could monitor the boy's work. "Remember, wait for my order to fire," he repeated, watching as the others nodded with the grim understanding of men conserving the last bullets in a lost battle. The sky above was pristine, mockingly blue, offering perfect visibility for the American bombardiers as they approached their target, a factory complex producing synthetic fuel from coal, one of the last functioning facilities of its kind in Germany. Without it, more tanks and planes would stand idle, more equations would balance in favor of the Allies. Joseph tracked the lead bomber through his optical sight, watching it grow from a speck to a recognizable B-17, its aluminum skin gleaming in the morning sun. He held his fire, counting down the distance, conserving their precious shells for the moment of maximum probability. Around them, other batteries maintained the same discipline, creating an eerie silence where once there would have been a continuous barrage. The bombers sensed the change, flying straight and level with even greater confidence, their formations tightening in the absence of the usual flak curtain. Joseph felt Friedrich's questioning gaze, but kept his eyes on the target, waiting until the mathematical probability crawled fractionally higher. "Fire!" The command broke the unnatural silence, sending their first shell screaming toward the formation now directly overhead. The gun bucked against its recoil mechanism as Friedrich fed the next shell into the breach, with movements that had become smoother with practice. Across the defensive ring, other batteries opened fire in the same moment, concentrating their limited resources on the lead elements of the bomber stream. The sky bloomed with precise patterns of black smoke, each explosion placed with the desperate accuracy of gunners who knew they would not get second chances. Joseph saw a B-17 shudder under multiple hits, its right wing dipping before the pilots fought it back to level flight. Not enough. Never enough. The bombs fell with calculated precision, walking across the factory complex in patterns designed to ensure maximum destruction with minimum expenditure of American resources. Joseph kept firing, directing their limited shells at each bomber as it reached the release point, knowing even as he did that they were participants in a mathematical exercise whose outcome had been determined years ago in factories an ocean away. Beside him, Friedrich loaded with mechanical efficiency, his young face set in lines of concentration that belonged on someone 3 times his age. 500 shells per gun, 20,000 needed per bomber, 1,000 American bombers each month. The equation remained unsolvable. As the last of the formation passed overhead, Joseph ordered their final shells held in reserve. The factory behind them burned with chemical intensity, sending plumes of acrid smoke into the sky to mark its position for any follow-up raids. Friedrich stood beside the now silent gun, his uniform streaked with the grime of battle, his eyes following the departing bombers with an expression Joseph recognized too well, the look of someone confronting implacable mathematics. "Did we get any of them?" the boy asked, his voice small against the background of distant explosions. Joseph placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling bones that seemed too fragile for the burdens placed upon them. "We made them work for it," he answered, offering the only truth that wasn't completely hollow. The sky above them was empty of German aircraft, filled only with the contrails of departing American bombers and the smoke of German industry being systematically erased. June found Joseph's battery reduced to 3 functioning guns, defending a railway junction that connected what remained of the Ruhr's industrial capacity to the rest of Germany. Their crew had been consolidated, survivors merged from multiple batteries into a single operational unit. Friedrich had remained with Joseph, his boyish frame somehow surviving the mathematics that had claimed older, stronger men. They had received no ammunition resupply in over a week, their remaining shells counted and recounted each evening, distributed among the guns with the careful rationing of a starving family dividing the last loaf of bread. 200 shells for their gun. 20,000 needed per bomber, 1,000 American bombers each month. Joseph no longer needed to calculate the equation. It had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. The air raid sirens had developed a particular wail that seemed to carry resignation rather than warning. Joseph moved his crew to their positions with quiet efficiency, assigning each man his task with the minimum of words. The radar operator reported a massive formation approaching from the southwest, B-17s and B-24s escorted by P-51 Mustangs. More aircraft than their remaining ammunition could hope to challenge, even if every shell found its mark. Around them, the defensive positions had grown sparse, many batteries destroyed or abandoned as the strategic situation deteriorated. Those that remained were manned by crews that mirrored Joseph's own, a mix of veterans with hollow eyes and boys with prematurely aged faces, all of them understanding the mathematics they faced. "Fire only on my direct command," Joseph instructed, his voice steady despite the knowledge pressing down upon him. "We target the lead bomber of each group at the moment of bomb release." The men nodded, accepting the futility of their assignment with the stoicism that had become Germany's last abundant resource. Friedrich positioned himself at the ammunition feed, his movements precise and controlled as he prepared the first shell for loading. Joseph watched him for a moment, seeing in the boy's disciplined efficiency a reflection of his own journey from eager recruit to disillusioned veteran. The transformation had taken Joseph 2 years. Friedrich had accomplished it in 2 months, the acceleration a mathematical function of Germany's collapsing position. The bombers appeared with the punctuality of industrial production, their formations arranged in perfect geometric patterns against the summer sky. Joseph tracked them through his optical sight, watching as they approached with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was weakened beyond effective resistance. The mathematics of their approach was flawless. Altitude, speed, and spacing all calculated to maximize bombing effectiveness while minimizing exposure to the diminished flak batteries below. Joseph felt a grudging professional admiration for the precision of their formation, even as he calculated the moments when his limited shells might have the greatest effect. "Battery fire!" Joseph's command sent their first shells skyward, joining the thin stream from the remaining German positions in a barrage that seemed pathetically inadequate against the armada above. The black puffs of their explosions appeared to apologize for their scarcity, isolated bursts where once there had been solid walls of flak. Friedrich loaded with mechanical precision, his young face set in lines of concentration as he handled each precious shell. Joseph watched their limited arsenal ascending to a mathematically certain fate, his calculations running alongside each trajectory. 200 shells, 20,000 needed, 1,000 bombers. The equation remained unsolvable, its answer written in burning factories and depleted resources. The bombs fell with industrial efficiency, erasing the railway junction in methodical patterns of destruction. Joseph continued directing their fire until the last shell left their barrel, the gun falling silent with a finality that matched the silence spreading across what remained of Germany's air defenses. Friedrich stood beside the now useless weapon, his young face streaked with sweat and grime, his eyes following the departing bombers with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had calculated his own futility. Above them, the American formations regrouped with mechanical precision, turning westward toward bases in England where fresh aircraft and bombs awaited. The sky that had once belonged to Germany now spoke with an American accent, its language the mathematics of industrial production. As the sound of the bombers faded, Joseph removed his headset and stepped back from the targeting equipment. The railway junction behind them had ceased to exist as a functional transport hub, transformed into a landscape of twisted metal and burning rolling stock. Friedrich approached him, his movements carrying the weight of questions too heavy for his young shoulders. "What happens now?" the boy asked, his voice small against the background of collapsing infrastructure. Joseph looked up at the empty sky, now belonging entirely to American equations. "Now we understand," he answered, the words inadequate against the mathematics that had already solved for Germany's defeat. The war wasn't lost in the sky, it was lost in the factories. Around them, the remaining crew members stood in silence, each man confronting his own version of the same inescapable calculation. 20,000 shells, 1 bomber, 1,000 bombers each month. The arithmetic of surrender written in the empty blue sky above them.